Blog Talk Radio.
Hello again. We have a full-on political episode in today's installment of the Ajay Bruno Show. My guest in this episode is Bob Ehrlich, a former governor and congressman from Maryland. Good afternoon, and welcome to the show.
Ajay, how are you?
All right. How are you?
I'm great. You forgot, as part of my resume, by the way, a member of the state legislature, which was a great job as a young lawyer, the Maryland legislature, and now I'm a partner at King and Spalding in D.C.
Of course. Definitely was going to ask about that as well. So let's talk about your background to start. Not only did you go to Princeton, but you were captain of the football team there too. Did you ever have any professional football aspirations, and what initially inspired you to pursue law to begin with?
Great questions. I was a jock, and football has been my ticket, like many working-class kids around the country, which is why I'm such a fan of the sport and its first defender with regard to the attack now, the war on football, which is a subject maybe we can get into a little bit.
Sure.
But the football was my ticket. As a working-class kid, it got me scholarships to some great schools, including Gilman in Baltimore, which is an elite private school, and then Princeton, and where I was captain of the team. And I subsequently, after college, became a graduate assistant at Wake Forest Law on the football staff, and that helped pay my way through law school. And I was a 6-foot, 200-pound linebacker, so to answer your question, there wasn't a great demand for undersized linebackers in the NFL. I did, however, think I had a shot in Canada, and I had in fact thought about going to law school in Canada and giving and playing a year of college up there, and then giving a look as far as the pros, and a knee injury at the end of my senior year ended that hope. So that's the football story with me. I'm a great defender of the sport. Both of my boys have played. I have a son who's a freshman defensive back at Villanova, and my 8th grader will be entering 9th grade next year, high school, and he's a quarterback.
Oh, wow. So before we go on and talk about politics, let's start with football, I suppose. I'm also a big fan. Go Eagles. So I assume you like the Redskins. So bit of a rivalry there.
We're Ravens here.
Oh, yeah, of course. You work in D.C., but from Maryland, so that makes sense, right? So I'm not a big fan of the current commissioner. I don't know what your opinion of his is.
I'm not a big fan at all.
No.
In fact, I have written critically of him. I believe, a number of the pieces, in fact, I've written concerning the NFL and the commissioner and the state of the sport and the kneeling issues are contained in my book. So I am a critic of this commissioner, that's for sure.
Sure. I was hoping they would get rid of him, but apparently not. So,
he's overpaid and underworked from what I can see, but the owners are happy with him. He makes some money, and that seems to be the end of the discussion.
Yeah. So what do you think of all the attacks on football with the whole concussion issue and all that?
Yeah, well, I think you have to divide the question. I'm a parent, and so obviously safety, it's always safety first with my kids, but I also am a fan of the sport, and they're not mutually exclusive. This is one sport where a dad simply can't volunteer. The whole heads-up thing from the NFL is a great thing. This is a sport where if dads want to help, they should, I believe, need to be certified. I believe teaching kids how to tackle and block and use their bodies in a pretty violent game necessitates that. So I have no problem with appropriate coaching, and I have no problem with the weight limits for the younger kids and some of the rules we have with the younger kids as far as the bigger kids not being able to play outside the box and things like that. I think it's all good. But what really concerns me is what I see from the left, from the progressive left in this country, which is a sustained war on football. As I said previously, football is really America's sport. It's wildly entertaining. It is a ticket for lots of working class kids to get to college. Forget the pros, and obviously that's a small percentage. But football is used by many, many young men to fulfill their dreams. And those dreams, by the way, are as much academic, career, as athletic. So my wife and I have taken the lead. You can imagine, given my profile and my association with the sport, I'm often asked to engage in conversations, particularly with moms concerned about their kids and the sport, and I tend to have those conversations regularly. But I write about this issue. I give speeches on this issue. I am a fan of the sport, and it needs to be protected from some of the more egregious complaints filed by people who don't know better.
No, I agree. It's gone too far in a lot of ways, and I mean, there's other sports that I think are great too. Obviously, baseball, but I think one difference would be with football, there's only 16 games a season. With baseball, I'm not going to sit there and watch 162 plus games. So I think it's easier to follow too.
Well, I just think it's great. And I played high school baseball. My kids play, and they're good players and all that. And I'm a huge baseball fan as well at the Orioles. But football teaches, and it's a cliche, you know that, and everybody knows. But the cliches are cliches because they're often true. And football teaches the kind of lessons I want young boys to learn. And it's just the opposite, actually, of the indictment lodged against football. It's teamwork. It's working together. It's discipline. It's hard work. It's learning. It's all not about you. It's all good stuff, life lessons. Let alone this sort of alpha male, overly aggressive stuff we hear lodged against football. Of course, it's an aggressive game. It's a rough game. It's a tough game. But again, that's I think to the extent boys that want to play should be allowed to play. If you don't want to play, great. If you don't maybe have the physical build as you get older to play, I understand that as well. But what concerns me is kids that want to play, can play, have a desire to play, and the parents don't let them. That really concerns me these days.
No, I agree. That definitely goes too far. So would you say any of the lessons you learned from football inspired you to actually run for the House of Delegates, or what brought that about? And was it easier running as a Republican during the Reagan years in '86?
Well, your questions are really logical because they really are related to one another. As someone who grew up in sports, very competitive, obviously, and something I'm teaching my boys, and my wife is equally competitive, and she's teaching our boys the same thing. The competitiveness of athletics and competitiveness of politics is similar. You have long campaigns, long preparation in athletics. You have sort of an end result. You either win or lose on election day. You win or lose on game day. You learn to win. You learn to lose. You learn to not be defeated in either. It's very similar, and I really marshaled that enthusiasm I have for competitive athletics into politics. I treated it the very same way my first campaign, where I ran as a wild underdog, an unknown, and upset a three-term incumbent because we outworked him. And so I've taken that same attitude to politics and into life, I hope. That's what I want my boys to learn as well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a great lesson. So from your time in the state legislature, how was that different running those campaigns and serving in there compared to when you decided to run for the House and you got in during that huge 1994 wave year?
Yeah, another good question because they're similar but certainly different substantively. Or I think I should say procedurally. As far as the substance, the issues you're dealing with, whether it's guns or abortion or taxes or tort reform or budgets, you name it. The issues are fairly much the same, whether you're balancing the state budget or you're balancing the federal budget. The jobs are very dissimilar. As a member of the state legislature, you're part-time. I still had my real job, I called it at the time, with a law firm in Baltimore. It's very hands-on. You actually draft amendments in conjunction with professional staff, but the staffs are not that large. You actually do a lot of hands-on things yourself as a member of the legislature. The staffs are very small. I had one part-time person to help me with constituent matters. That was my entire staff as a member of the Maryland House of Delegates. Obviously, when you go to Congress, you make that leap. Now you're representing 600,000 people, or more than that today, obviously, with reapportionment. You have more than 20 on your staff. You have a very professional casework operation. Foreign policy issues then become more relevant. So it's a much larger job. I loved both. As a young lawyer, I loved being in Annapolis, learning the trade. Going to Congress in '94 with a new majority and Newt and and some of the initiatives that we implemented at the time, including welfare reform and balanced budgets, and it was just in rebuilding the military. It was really a wild, fun, interesting time. I've always told people, they ask me what Congress is like, and I tell them it's a graduate seminar and things you really want to know about. You learn a lot. If you're smart, particularly as a young legislator or a young congressman, you sit there and learn. You don't ask. You're not a hot dog. You're not an independent contractor. You go out there and you do your job, but you also learn. So I love those jobs, and I really felt that both jobs prepared me to become governor.
Yeah. Well, before we jump to talk about your gubernatorial run and your time there, one thing that I think they should probably do in Congress is be more part-time and have leaner staff than they do. I mean, the amount of money that seems to go towards that is just huge. I think it's over $6 billion, and in a lot of ways, state legislatures seem to function better than Congress.
Well, the caveat, the observation I would add to you is this. The modern House, particularly, in the Senate it's the same way, but the modern House, you don't really have a whole lot of dollars. I think when I was there, it was about $1 million a year to pay everybody and to run your operation. And I'm talking about the salaries came out of that, and so people were not getting wealthy when you divide that by 22 staff members and all that, and office rent. And many of these folks are dedicated to casework, which is helping people interact with the federal government. And that casework is not going to diminish. So I would say I would not diminish the number of caseworkers. People expect government to help them. They get frustrated when government gets in their way. Their Social Security check does not arrive on time. Their veterans benefits, whatever it happens to be. So people have a logical right to expect the government to work for them, not the other way around.
Oh, that makes sense. So it was one thing, of course, to have the success you did with smaller constituencies, but you then decided to run for governor in the 2002 election and win in such a heavily Democrat state that hadn't elected a Republican since Spiro Agnew. What was your mentality like as you tackled and ultimately won that race?
Well, it was pragmatic and realistic. I knew the odds were against us. It was and is an overwhelmingly Democratic state, but not just Democrat. It was also liberal. It was left of center, and today even progressive in many respects. So I knew our work was cut out. I did have the advantage of having a safe seat in the House. I had a really good base to run from. Working class Democrats were part of my political base, as they are for President Trump, as they are basically for any conservative Republican these days. I knew I could leverage that into crossover support in the general election campaign. The Republican Party coalesced behind me. We raised a lot of money. We ran against Bobby Kennedy's daughter, who was a formidable person, obviously, as a sitting lieutenant governor, and executed a very strong campaign plan, and won, and maintained very high approval numbers throughout my tenure, although we lost the re-election in a wipeout year in 2006.
Yeah, that was a rough one. So for those of us who hadn't yet had the privilege of being in a role like governor, can you describe what it's like to be entrusted with a position like that on a day-to-day basis?
Another really good question, because it's different. I thought I was a pro. I was a vet, even though I was in my mid-30s. My early 40s at the time. I had been in politics, elected politics, office for 16 years, state, federal. I had engaged in debates. I had traveled the country for candidates, been with presidents and all that, and then boom, one day you're elected, and the next day you realize it's just you. You're not a member of a legislature. You're not just wearing a uniform of a party. You're the team captain again. It's you. It's your administration. It has your name attached to it. You make the appointments. It's your cabinet. It's your budget. You'll be judged accordingly. And so it's a different ballgame. I've met a lot of smart people in politics who have legislative mindsets. They should stay in legislatures. I've met people in politics who have strong executive mindsets. They should run for county executives and governor and president. So it's a very different skill set in my view. And again, although it was daunting, I felt I was prepared for it, but it is very different.
Mm-hmm. And one of your biggest achievements, of course, was signing the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act.
Yeah.
I read that blue crab populations are still declining, though. So all this time later, do you think it's had the desired effect, or what more should be done?
Well, it's quite well. The oysters are coming back, and the crabs go back and forth. Sometimes you have banner years. A lot of the crab health is related as much to the type of winter you had, whether young crabs died with the frost, whether hurricanes came up the bay, unrelated to pollution, unrelated to phosphorus and nitrogen. We were very successful with the Chesapeake Bay Restoration Act. We upgraded our sewage treatment plants around the watershed. It was a good thing from watermen to the farmers. We gave the farmers dollars for cover crops so that the runoff would not be running into the bay. As I go around Maryland today, a lot of people thank me. The bay is certainly not saved, but it's in better health, far better health than it was 20 years ago. The Chesapeake Bay Foundation described my bill as the most significant environmental initiative in 20 years. And they were right. It was a good thing to do. It was the right thing to do. It's helped save our bay. Again, the oyster population is being replenished, and that's very important as well.
No, it's such a fantastic natural resource, so it was definitely a big achievement you had.
Well, it's also, people don't realize, people see it as wholly an environmental issue. It's a huge economic issue in Maryland. We talk about the watermen, the crabbers, but Ocean City itself, the boating in Maryland is a huge recreational sport. Fishing. So it's not just a environmental issue; it's an economic engine driver. There's a lot of money spent in Maryland as a result of a cleaner bay, and that's all to the good.
No, both tie in. That definitely helps. So, as a lawyer, obviously you know about all the horror stories we hear about people being falsely convicted based on flimsy evidence that doesn't amount to beyond a reasonable doubt. You had a very progressive, in a good way, attitude towards clemency as governor. How did that sort of outlook come into fruition for you?
People ask me that all the time because it's a major part of my legacy. I've written about it. I lecture on it widely. And we were doing it when no one else was doing it in the early part of the millennium. In 2003 to 2007, we were granting pardons, commutations, looking at lifers, looking at situations where maybe somebody shouldn't be in jail for as long as they were in jail, looking at situations where people were overcharged, quite frankly. Now, I'm not talking about innocent situations here. Innocent is innocent, and with DNA and now modern science, you have people exonerated. That's easy. That's the easy stuff. Somebody's exonerated. What states typically do is give them some money and say, I'm sorry. And that's not good enough, but that's all really you can do in retrospect. I'm talking about the more difficult lifer cases, or people who are overcharged, or people simply who wanted another restart in life, who had gotten into a bar fight, or maybe had a DUI or a drug conviction at an early age, and now 10, 20, 25 years later, they're trying to get a security clearance at National Security Agency, and they have that mark on their record, and it needs to be expunged. And we did. We did it in large numbers, and we looked at every case and thoroughly vetted every case, and we would have monthly meetings. And so pardons and commutations, and particularly with regard to employment, collateral consequences, it's a major part of my legacy, something I'm very proud of.
No, that's great. And that's something which I think, particularly from the conservative point of view, too much is put on, I would say, the punitive aspect of it, and not so much on how do you solve it.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
It's a very good point. And look, I am pro capital punishment. I had two cases go all the way. As governor, I did not commute those sentences at the end. They were executed. So I think it's not liberal conservative. It's justice. I think the definition of what governors do, presidents do, is justice. You try to do justice. And to the extent you find the criminal justice system unfair in some respects, you can't cure every problem. But you can, as a governor, particularly in this state with a lot of power, exercise that power to achieve justice. And we did. And, again, I'm very proud of that part of our record.
Great. So similarly in the law enforcement side of things, One issue which I think is a problem in many places would be traffic ticket quotas. That's often abused by police stations, obviously for profit and to meet those numbers. But you did something
and cameras,
yeah.
speed cameras, Big Brother. Yeah, it's again, it what that stuff does is generate disrespect for the law and law enforcement. I am a big law enforcement advocate. Support the police, support the blue. But this kind of stuff, it's just money makers for government, and it's wrong.
No, definitely. So one of the big controversies you dealt with was with Dubai Ports World issue, which obviously impacted your state, with Baltimore being one of the targeted ports. When you heard about this plan, were you immediately opposed to it, and what concerns you about a UAE company potentially being in control there?
It was just, again, you have to, we talk about criminal profiling, which is wrong. Criminal profiling, which is correct. But ethnic profiling, religious profiling, racial profiling, obviously wrong. It was post 9/11. It was just a concern. It was a source of concern post 9/11. We didn't know what we were dealing with. Obviously, we have some great Sunni allies now in the Middle East. We have for years, but it was something that I thought that needed to be looked at, given the tenor of the situation, given the fact that for the early part of my administration, I believe it was called Code Orange, which was a heightened sense of there's probably going to be a likelihood of a terror attack in the United States. One day on a call from the FBI, I closed down the Harbor Tunnel in Maryland, a major thoroughfare, for a number of hours because the FBI told me they had reason to believe there were 4 guys on their way to potentially blow up that tunnel.
Jeez.
So, it's something that, and I'll just say this with regard to that time and still this time, the first responders to show up at the Pentagon was the local fire department. I mean, local government and state government, we're the front line. We pay the Marines, we pay the Army, we pay everyone, our great soldiers to go fight the bad guys and kill the bad guys in foreign lands. But when it comes to the homeland, we obviously have the FBI and law enforcement, but governors and local law enforcement and local county executives are really the front lines. First responders means first responders, and they are local. So that reality really hits you in the terror era, in the post 9/11 era.
No, that makes sense. So the city of Baltimore is outside of the Inner Harbor, which I think is really a beautiful area, but it's
gorgeous,
not exactly the safest in other parts of the city. What's been the issue with getting their act cleaned up, and what would you suggest doing about it?
Oh, geez. Well, I write about this. There's some essays in the book, and by the way, the book is called Bet You Didn't See That One Coming. There's some essays about Baltimore in the book, and about some of our problems with our cities. Baltimore, I'm a Baltimore kid. It makes my heart hurt to see what Baltimore is today. You've had flight, race flight, class flight, failing public education in many respects. You've had industrial era jobs dry up in the post-industrial era. You've had a horrific onset of drug abuse, a drug epidemic, small gangs, uncontrollable, very violent, and gun violence break out as a result. And a lot of people are scared, and a lot of poor people are scared, and they can't move, and they're trapped. And it makes your heart bleed to see, again, you have high property taxes, again, lack of jobs, people will not relocate jobs. It's a vicious cycle, and I've written about it extensively, called for some radical changes, and radical property tax relief, and radical new sort of policing, as Giuliani successfully accomplished in New York. So it's a problem, and I see a lot of politicians talking past the problem, but it's a real problem in cities like Baltimore.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. So one of the other big issues during your administration was the so-called Walmart bill. That was passed despite your veto of it, but then it was thrown out in court later. What was the whole story behind that, and what do you think about that one looking back?
It was simply Walmart was targeted by me, and Maryland's a very union state. The unions at the time did not like Walmart very much. They were non-union. And so they decided to come up with some arbitrary threshold with regard to health insurance and made a big deal of Walmart not offering health insurance. And they passed a bill that basically only targeted Walmart, and which I knew would be thrown out of court. And it was very controversial. Obviously, they got a lot of folks excited about the bill. I vetoed it. We strongly thought it would be overturned by the courts, and it was. But it was more a political statement than anything. It was a union statement. We don't like Walmart, and that's not a very good way to legislate.
No. I thought there were a few other companies that it affected too, like Northrop Grumman and
at the time, I believe. At the time, if my memory serves me, it was basically one. But it was whether it impacted anyone else or not. It was primarily about Walmart.
Yeah, I'll talk about it.
Because at the time, the unions had a national campaign against Walmart.
Yeah. So going into the 2006 election, what do you think the factors were that kept you from being reelected? And given that you were only slightly behind in the last polls, what sort of expectations did you have for the outcome of that one?
Well, the problem was that we were we maintained a pretty high approval rate throughout my tenure, as you've seen, and if you've done, I'm sure you've done your research. But that approval number did not translate into re-elect votes. It was a very bad cycle for President Bush. Obviously, Iraq was very unpopular at the time. The president was very unpopular. Republicans were unpopular. And in a blue state, mid-50s, high 50s approval rate was not the ticket to get reelected, and so it was obviously very disappointing. But I certainly left with my head high. Thought we accomplished a lot of what I wanted to accomplish. We turned the budget around in a very significant way as far as the budget deficit we inherited, as opposed to what we left. So. Very disappointed, obviously, extremely disappointed in losing the race, but very proud of what we did, and very proud, quite frankly, of how popular we were despite losing the race. Again, as I told you earlier in this interview, we're a competitor. Winning counts, losing counts. So it was certainly a turn, we thought, in the wrong direction for Maryland, but that's what the people voted for.
Right. No, I thought that one was a real shame. I mean, politicians make promises all the time, but you pretty much kept all of them, and to not be returned for another term, I found that perplexing. So.
Well, so did we. But you know what? Life goes on, and life's been very good to me. And again, this is my. I started writing books and continuing to play a part in the political process. As someone who's done a lot of, as you know, cable news shows and a lot of speeches and policy speeches and political speeches for candidates around the country, and now my fourth book. So we're still out there doing my thing, although I'm not in elected office.
Sure. So you took another shot at governor in 2010. In the late spring and summer, the race was extremely tight, and you even were ahead in some of the polls. But then the result turned out to be pretty disappointing in the end.
We got just really murdered in the Washington suburbs with money, and it was not one of my best decisions I made in my life. But I did feel, as I said, I felt that we had unfinished work, and a lot of people close to me thought I should do it again. I had some qualms, but those folks carried the day, and those people love me a lot. So the bottom line is I made a bad decision, but again, it was great to be back out there and talking about the things I wanted to talk about, and hoping that Maryland would not go so far left, but it did. And that was, for me, that was certainly a line in the sand. That the political run had been terrific, but that was enough of politics as far as that end of politics, and that's when I started writing the books.
Sure. So we have a few generic questions, but there's one issue with one of your positions that I've always been curious about. So your position on abortion isn't totally clear to me. I was wondering, do you identify as personally pro-life but not in a legislative way?
Yes,
or would you,
that's a great question. Well, because the reason is most of the issues that are relevant today are my position is you would call pro-life. But I'm certainly not across the board pro-life in any respect. But the issues that you see, and by the way, these issues were more front burner a couple years ago, particularly 5, 10, 15 years ago than they are today. The ability to protest outside of an abortion clinic, late-term abortions, which I oppose, taxpayer-financed abortions, which I oppose, very liberalized Medicaid statutes around the country, which I oppose. Maryland has one. Parental consent, which I support. So a lot of these issues, although not central to the issue, are around the issue. So since Roe versus Wade, most of the debate has been around these peripheral, certainly they're abortion-related issues.
Yeah.
And I would say, clear with regard to these issues, more pro-life.
Sure.
But,
so let's say,
but again, certainly, I had supported the a major pro-choice bill in Maryland as a member of the legislature. As far as basically codifying Roe versus Wade, and I did support that.
Mm-hmm. Let's say, because we're only one justice away from it, if Roe v. Wade were thrown out, would then you have a different outlook on that in terms of?
It's interesting. I voted my conscience every time. I voted what I thought was right. I've done again. I've had people, in my office, and I've literally in the state legislature, I have people in my office. A lady, I guess, a wife who had been raped, and her husband said, she has to have that baby. And I remember this, and I disagree with that. But I understood, sort of the consistency of that position, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
But I could not. I hope that most politicians these days, besides those on the far hard left, would agree that we've had too many abortions, and a better society means less abortions. I would hope that's the case, particularly with regard to partial birth abortions and these what you see these days, sort of from the far really hard left. I think it turns people off. I certainly hope it does.
No, definitely, it's an extreme position when they support that. So, with your state in particular, and I guess it might apply to a few others, there might be some leaning Republican or Democrat, but because there's so many independents in a lot of places, it makes it more up for grabs. Even some places, like Massachusetts. But in Maryland, with Democrats having a clear majority, it's hard to imagine so many of them not showing up to vote. Yet occasionally, obviously, Republicans do win when statistically that shouldn't be plausible. Right. What do you make of that?
It's interesting. You've sort of captured the formula for us to win. When Governor Hogan won, when I won, when any Republican can win statewide, you tend to have a set of circumstances, and those circumstances are, in no particular order, a political environment that does not excite the Democratic base. And you have a pretty popular Republican who's run a good race. And you've had that Republican being able to access enough money where the message can get out that despite the fact it's a Republican and we typically don't go there, this person's okay. It's not the end of the world. Literally, that's sort of the messaging you have to make in certain parts of the state. So, and then if the Republican base, which is small, but so I should say the conservative base, which includes this sort of Trump, Reagan, crossover Democrat working class base, if they're motivated to come out, then you can win. Mm-hmm. Then you can win. It really depends a lot on the Washington suburbs. And the Baltimore suburbs. The Washington suburbs being left of center, it's where Democrats go to get their votes, and the Baltimore suburbs, despite the fact there are more Democrats than Republicans, far more, but that's where Republicans go to get their votes.
Interesting. So on a more national scale, what issues concern you the most moving forward for the country? The
racial divide.
Mm-hmm.
persistent, deep poverty, multi-generational poverty, and ill-serving the underclass in this country. Certainly the opioid epidemic, which we live in my family. My wife runs drug courts. She's a drug court prosecutor in Anne Arundel County, Maryland. We help bring drug courts to Maryland. I believe in drug. We talked about criminal justice reform earlier. I believe in drug courts. But the opioid epidemic, the seemingly unlimited desire of Americans to get high concerns me. So they would certainly be two. I think the third would be this weird anti-countercultural sense with some millennials on campus that it's okay to shut down speech. It's that they need safe zones and trigger warnings and speech codes and all this sort of ridiculous, absolutely ludicrous stuff that you hear going on college campuses these days. But it's all about shutting down speech. It's all about shutting down dissent. It's all about silencing conservative thought. And it's something that is of great concern to me. I talk about it a lot. I give a lot of speeches about this movement on campus. It's very dangerous. It's impacted a lot of young people. A lot of young people do not believe in markets or capitalism or freedom of speech these days, and that's very, very disquieting.
No, that's something which concerns me a lot too, because I know from experience, a lot of these people, they'll say they're for free speech and all, but if you disagree with them, then suddenly it's a whole different tune, and that's not how it's supposed to work.
As long as they're in their comfort level. I mean, it's I don't know who taught a lot of these young kids that they have a right to go through life in a pleasant way, undisturbed. With safe zones and Twinkies and you only know Twinkie. Oh, they still make Twinkies? I don't think they do anymore. But donuts or coloring books, whatever it happens to be. But the bottom line is this term snowflakes come about to describe this sort of countercultural mindset. When I was growing up, liberals believed in speech and dissent and protest, and that's how the anti-war movement occurred, and the women's movement, and the civil rights movement. And now today, the left on campus wants to shut down everything they disagree with, and that's just wrong. And my word to those right of center students on campus is, do not indulge, do not be silenced. Confront them, and that's the only way that we're going to preserve our culture, quite frankly.
No, that's good advice. So before our closing question, I do have a bit of a fun question. So you're actually the second governor I've talked to who's had something of an acting career. You appeared on an episode of The Wire, which is, of course, considered by many to be a fantastic show. What was that experience like playing a state trooper guarding the governor?
Yeah, guarding me.
Guarding yourself, yeah.
Yeah, it was fun, and I had a ball. I'm a huge fan of the show. The show gave a lot. By the way, a lot of the detractors of the show hated the fact that what it depicted with regard to Baltimore. I liked the show because it was realistic and real, but it also gave a lot of young actors, an opportunity to break into the business. I had I think 9 or 11 spoken words as the state trooper outside my office. And anybody that followed Maryland politics at the time sort of got these inside jokes. I stopped the mayor of Baltimore who wanted to come see me, the Republican governor, to ask for money for his failing city schools. Which was really a play of what was happening in real life, in my real life. So it was humorous for some. People bring it up to me all the time. My limited cameo, but I had a lot of fun doing it.
Oh, that's great. So I know you talked about just releasing a new book. Is there anything else you're working on, whether it's as a lawyer in terms of your career in general, and is there any chance you'll take a crack at another elected office at some point?
Well, a couple things. One, the book came out very hot, number one on one of Amazon's political categories. which got a lot of attention. It's entitled "Bet You Didn't See That One Coming." It describes the last year of the Obama administration, the first year of the Trump administration, and the contrast and why Trump, how this occurred, how could possibly occur. So I really enjoyed writing this book, and I'm enjoying running around the country, lecturing about it, doing book signings and all that. Again, it's my fourth book, and I'm really having a lot of fun with this one. As far as my future, unknown at present. Certainly, I'm not going to run again in Maryland, not for elected office, but if the right appointed position came up in Washington here, I might take a look at it. We've had some preliminary discussions, but nothing to report. We'll see. I have an 18-year-old, a 14-year-old, lots of games to attend, a very involved, active wife. We support a lot of conservative and Republican causes, and a lot of charitable causes as well. So my life is very full and very satisfying.
Sure. Well, I hope to see you, run or serve in some capacity. And
well, thank you very much. I appreciate it very much. It's been a great ride, a ride I'm proud of. And again, I should mention as well, as I run around the country doing political speeches, I'm also talking about the criminal justice reform, and sometimes I'm invited to very liberal venues where I give my message, and people are surprised. I guess they don't hate me, so it's pretty funny sometimes. But in any event, I think that's again an issue as part of my legacy. I have a clinic dedicated to the issue at Columbus School of Law. That's the law school at Catholic University, and so again, I'm active in various causes that I believe in.
Sure. Now, actually, before I let you go, I just remembered, if you ever saw the show Oz, I think that was supposed to take place in Maryland. Did you ever hear anything about your state being the location for that, or no?
No, but when they filmed Annapolis and was in Philadelphia, I got very upset. But
no, from what I remember, that wasn't a great movie anyway.
Yeah, what the heck. No. But I wasn't happy at the time. But because really, as a governor, you're chief marketer, and that's why the Preakness is such a great day. It's been in my mind, obviously, this week. It's the day you get to market Maryland to the world. It's the most fun day to be governor.
No, definitely. I watch all three of those races, so that's a good one. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and once again, thanks so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Take care, my friend. Bye-bye.
You too. That was Governor Bob Ehrlich. We had a really wide-ranging discussion there. A lot of good issues were discussed. A lot of topics were covered. We are still working out our guests for next week, so stay tuned for that. If you want to follow the show, we have a new Twitter handle to get the word out there. I finally gave in and used that, and it's been going well so far. So be sure to follow @ReaganWorldwide. That's @ReaganWorldwide. You'll get updates about the show and all sorts of interesting conservative commentary and other issues. So until next time, this has been Ajay Bruno for the Ajay Bruno Show. And I'm signing off for now. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.